There has to be a mistake. I'm a real estate professional. I work with these families. I help them.
That man is not Daniel Henderson. He is Richard Alan Cassidy, a licensed real estate agent working out of Scottsdale, Arizona. And for 4 years straight, he did not help elderly families. He took everything they had. Across 23 victims, most of them over the age of 70, Cassidy quietly drained one account at a time. Retirement savings, home equity, life insurance money set aside over decades. When investigators added it all up, the total came to $1.87 million. He now faces 14 federal counts of wire fraud, elder abuse, and money laundering, carrying a maximum sentence of 240 years. And that leather portfolio tucked under his arm when the officers walked up, it had contracts inside, fresh ones. 2 more families who had no idea what was about to happen to them. He was still working. Think about the people in your life who are older, a grandparent, a parent, a neighbor. If a trusted real estate agent sat across from them and said their savings could double in 18 months, would they have pushed back? Drop your honest answer in the comments below. Cases like this one show exactly how trust gets turned into a weapon inside systems that were built to protect people. This channel covers the evidence, the psychology, and the exact moment it all came apart. If that sounds like something you want to see more of, subscribe and hit the bell, because what Richard Cassidy did over those 4 years is something you will not see coming. Richard Cassidy grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a house where money was always the thing nobody wanted to talk about, but everybody thought about. His father sold used cars for a living, and he had one rule he lived by. The deal doesn't close on facts, it closes on feelings. Get the customer to trust you, and the paperwork takes care of itself. His mother ran the household the opposite way. Coupons clipped every Sunday, color-coded envelopes for every expense, a glass jar on the kitchen counter with a strip of masking tape across it, 2 words written in her neat handwriting, someday. Richard watched both of them carefully. He was never the kid who struggled. He was the kid who performed. Debate team by 9th grade, church treasurer at 17. He had a way of sitting across from someone and making them feel like they were the only person in the room. His high school guidance counselor put it in writing, a recommendation letter that described Richard as having an unusual ability to make people feel understood. At the time, it read like a compliment. Looking back, it reads like a warning. He found real estate the way a lot of people find their calling, by accident. A weekend seminar during his first year of community college. He didn't walk in interested in property or investment theory, but something clicked the moment the speaker described the commission structure. The family signs, the deal closes, and the person in the blazer walks out with a check. That image stayed with him. He got his license at 22. Within the year, he had packed up and moved to Arizona. And here's where it gets important, because Richard Cassidy did not move there for the sunshine or the low taxes or the open desert. He moved there because he had looked at the numbers. Arizona's retirement corridor was pulling in thousands of seniors every year, people relocating from colder states, leaving behind big family homes, and arriving with equity in their pockets and no local network to lean on. People who needed someone they could trust to help them figure out what came next. Richard Cassidy had spent his whole life learning how to be exactly that person. He just hadn't decided yet what he was going to do with it. For the first 7 years, Richard Cassidy was exactly the man his clients believed him to be. He built his business slowly and carefully, the way you build anything meant to last. He focused on senior transitions, helping older couples sell the family home they had lived in for 30 years and move into something smaller, something more manageable. It was emotional work. These weren't just property deals. They were the end of a chapter for most of these families, and a lot of agents didn't have the patience for it. Cassidy did, or at least he was very good at looking like he did. His client reviews used the same word over and over again, patient. His broker called him a natural. In 3 retirement-adjacent zip codes around Scottsdale, he became known as the agent who didn't rush you, the one who would sit at your kitchen table for 2 hours, answer every question twice, and never once make you feel like you were wasting his time. By year 5, that reputation had opened a different kind of door. Families who lived out of state, adult children in Chicago or Seattle or Boston, started calling Cassidy directly. Their parents were getting older. They couldn't manage their own property decisions anymore. They needed someone on the ground, someone local and trusted, who could step in and handle things. Cassidy became that person, and with that role came access that went far beyond a standard real estate relationship. Financial disclosures, estate planning documents. In several cases, he was sitting in meetings with estate attorneys, the only non-family member in the room. He knew what people owned, he knew what they were worth, he knew who was watching, and more importantly, who wasn't. None of that access was taken. All of it was given, freely, by people who had watched him work for years and had no reason to doubt him. That is the part that matters most. Because the fraud that was coming didn't start with a break-in or a hack or a forged signature in a back office somewhere. It started with a decade of showing up on time, returning phone calls, and making elderly people feel safe. The trust was real. He had earned it. He just hadn't decided what to spend it on yet. To understand what Richard Cassidy did, you first have to understand what the system was and wasn't built to catch. In Arizona, becoming a licensed real estate agent requires a background check, pre-licensing coursework, and an exam. After that, agents are required to complete continuing education every 2 years to keep their license active. There is broker supervision. Someone above them is supposed to be watching. On paper, it sounds like a system with checks in place. But here is what the system does not require. Once a license is active, there is no mandatory review of how an agent interacts with a client's finances. An agent can sit in on estate planning meetings, hold copies of financial disclosure documents, and act as an informal financial advisor. And none of that triggers a single regulatory review. No audit, no flag, no follow-up call. As long as the licensed transactions look clean, nobody is looking behind them. Now add in the specific situation of a senior client going through a major life transition. These deals are not like a young couple buying their first home. Senior transitions involve large sums of money, often the biggest financial event of a person's final decades. They are emotionally heavy, frequently tied to the death of a spouse or a sudden health diagnosis. The client is often stressed, grieving, and overwhelmed by paperwork they don't fully understand. Adult children are not always present at signings. In many cases, the agent in the room is the most informed person there, and the client has no one else to turn to for a second opinion. That is the structural weakness. And it goes one level deeper. There is no automatic check on the gap between what an agent tells a client their money will do and what it actually does. A licensed agent can walk a client through something called a portfolio equity program, which sounds official, looks like a real investment product, and is presented as a natural extension of the property sale. Unless that client independently contacts a financial attorney and asks someone outside the transaction to review it, there is no verification happening at the point of sale. None. Most clients don't do that because they already trust the person sitting across from them. Richard Cassidy did not accidentally find this gap. He did not stumble into it one slow afternoon and realize what was possible. He understood the architecture of it. He knew exactly where the oversight ended and where his freedom began. He had spent 7 years inside the system, watching how it worked, learning where it looked and where it didn't. By the time he was ready to move, he already knew the answer to the most important question. Who was going to stop him? Every story like this one has a moment, a specific point where a person who knew exactly where the line was made a decision to step over it. For Richard Cassidy, that moment came in the spring of 2019. The market had slowed. His commission income dropped sharply in the first quarter, and it didn't bounce back the way he needed it to. On the surface, his life still looked the same. The leased BMW in the driveway, the country club membership, the Scottsdale condo with the clean finishes and the mountain view. But underneath all of that, the numbers were coming apart. He had an investment property he owed more on than it was worth. His credit card debt had been quietly growing for over a year. The lifestyle he had built, the one that made him look exactly like the kind of successful professional his clients trusted, was costing more than he was making. He needed money, and he knew exactly where to find it. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 74 years old, a retired school teacher from outside Phoenix, and she had just lost her husband of 41 years. Cassidy had sold her previous home 2 years earlier. She knew him. She liked him. When he called to check in after her husband's passing, she was grateful to hear a familiar voice. He came to her with a document he called a reinvestment structure, a program, he explained, that would allow the $180,000 in proceeds from her home sale to grow steadily over time through a managed real estate equity arrangement. It looked real. It had the right language, the right formatting, the right weight to it. Eleanor signed. The funds moved into an account Richard Cassidy controlled. Over the next several months, she received 2 quarterly statements showing steady, modest returns. He had typed them himself. Then the statements stopped. Eleanor assumed there was a delay. She didn't want to be a bother. Cassidy had already moved on to the next one. 3 months later, he did it again, then twice more before the end of the year. Each time the target was the same: a senior client, recently widowed or freshly relocated, someone with a large sum in transition, and no one close by asking questions. By 2021, the operation had grown into something far beyond a desperate grab for quick cash. He had set up a shell company in Nevada, registered under a version of his middle name. He had built a library of fabricated property documents, detailed enough to hold up under casual review for more than 2 years. 23 victims, $1.87 million. A forged portfolio sitting in a locked drawer, thick enough to look like it came from a real institution. He had turned his entire career into the setup for a con. These cases don't happen because victims were naive. They happen because professionals with decade-long reputations are extraordinarily difficult to doubt. That's why this channel exists, to show you exactly how these systems get exploited and exactly how they get caught. Subscribe and hit the bell. Richard Cassidy had thought carefully about a lot of things: the documents, the shell company, the fabricated statements, the timing. What he had not thought carefully enough about was a woman named Patricia Marsh flying in from out of state to help her elderly mother file her taxes. Patricia was Eleanor's daughter. She lived in Seattle and made it to Arizona a few times a year when she could. In early 2022, she sat down at her mother's kitchen table with a box of financial paperwork and started going through it the way you do when you're trying to get everything organized, methodically, line by line. And somewhere in that process, she hit a number that didn't make sense: $180,000 from the sale of her mother's home. Gone. Not in a bank account. Not in any investment record Eleanor could point to. Not anywhere. Eleanor told her about Richard, about the reinvestment structure, about the quarterly statements that had stopped coming. Patricia contacted Arizona's Department of Real Estate the next morning. They reviewed the initial complaint and referred the case to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit within the week. What happened next moved faster than Cassidy could have anticipated. Investigators pulled his full transaction history and began cross-referencing client financial disclosures against actual recorded property transfers. The shell company in Nevada surfaced within 6 weeks. It had been registered under a variation of his middle name, close enough to find once you were looking, invisible if you weren't. Then they searched his home office. Inside a desk drawer, they found a plain spiral notebook, handwritten, no typed labels, no official formatting, just columns, page after page in Cassidy's own handwriting, client names, deposit amounts, dates of fabricated statements, notes on follow-up calls, and in the margin next to Eleanor Marsh's name, written in the same calm, neat print as everything else around it, a single word: settled. But it was 2 text messages recovered from his phone that showed investigators exactly who they were dealing with. In one exchange, Cassidy had texted a colleague with a single observation about his client base. Not a question, not a plan, just a statement, typed out and sent like it was the most obvious thing in the world. These clients don't have anyone watching. That's the whole thing. His colleague never wrote back. There was no response in the thread, no reply, no reaction, no acknowledgement of any kind. Cassidy had sent it anyway. That one sentence, casual, confident, completely unprompted, told investigators everything they needed to know about how Richard Cassidy saw the people he had spent a decade building trust with. Not as clients, not as families, as a condition, a favorable set of circumstances he had identified and decided to use. The arrest was scheduled within weeks. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2023 when it finally ended. Not in a courtroom, not in a lawyer's office, but in a sunny suburban driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, in front of a retired couple from Minnesota who had no idea what they had almost walked into. Cassidy was dressed the way he always dressed, pressed polo shirt, leather portfolio under his arm, the client's name written on the front tab in his clean, careful handwriting. He was mid-showing, mid-performance, doing what he had done hundreds of times before. And then two officers walked toward him across the driveway. They called him Daniel Henderson first, deliberately. It is a known tactic. Use a wrong name. Watch how a person reacts. An innocent person corrects you and moves on. Cassidy stopped. His face did the same thing it had done the first time we saw him on that body cam footage. Not quite fear. Not quite confusion. Something in between. The officers identified themselves. They told him why they were there. His final words before he asked for a lawyer were these: "I want you to know these people came to me. I didn't go looking for this." He was charged on 14 federal counts. His attorney filed 2 separate motions to have the spiral notebook thrown out as evidence. Both were denied. By November 2023, facing the full weight of what investigators had built against him, Richard Alan Cassidy pleaded guilty to 9 counts, including wire fraud and elder financial abuse. At sentencing, the judge looked across the courtroom and said something that cut through all of the legal language and got to the center of what had actually happened over those 4 years. You did not exploit a system. You exploited grief. Cassidy was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Of the $1.87 million he had taken, investigators recovered roughly $340,000. The rest was gone, spent on the condo, the car, the country club, the appearance of a life that was never fully real. The remaining victims received partial payments through a state elder fraud compensation fund. Eleanor Marsh, now 77 years old, received $43,000, less than a quarter of what he had taken from her after her husband died. His real estate license was permanently revoked. His Scottsdale condo was sold at auction. When the staging company cleared out the unit, they left a few things behind on the kitchen counter, the kind of small items that don't seem worth packing. Among them, a single color-coded envelope from a previous tenant, still sealed, still labeled in someone else's handwriting. Someday. Richard Cassidy's someday is a federal prison cell. The families he targeted are still waiting for theirs. If you want to see how a mortgage broker in Houston spent 11 years inside a bank, quietly building the exact reputation and access he would later use to steal $4.3 million from it, that case is dropping very soon. The link is in the description. Don't miss it.